The morning broke cold and colorless, the kind of pale gray dawn that made even the most hardened man feel as though the sun had forgotten the world. Frost clung to the wooden shingles of the jailhouse, brittle white shards that cracked and fell with each faint gust of wind. Sheriff Kane stood at the edge of Main Street, boots planted firm in the dust, silver badge heavy against his chest. His black hat threw a shadow across his steel-gray eyes as he surveyed the silent town. It was too quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the sharp stillness of a town waiting for trouble. He pulled the ring of keys from his coat pocket, the iron clinking against each other in the cold. His scar, running from jaw to neck, itched the way it always did when something wasn't right. Kane twisted the heavy brass key into the jail's lock and pushed the door inward. The hinges groaned. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Stale tobacco smoke, sweat, and the faint trace of whiskey spilled the night before. The second was the sound, or rather the absence of it. No cough, no muttered curse, no boots shuffling against the floorboards. The cells were empty. Sheriff Kane's jaw tightened. The outlaw was gone. The cell door swung lazily back and forth, iron bars rattling against their sockets. The heavy lock he'd set the night before lay intact, untouched. The keys were still on his belt, yet the bunk inside was bare, the thin blanket tossed aside, the bed frame cold. Kane stepped inside, his duster brushing the dusty floor. His hand lingered near the Colt .45 at his hip, as though the ghost of the prisoner might leap from the shadows. He crouched low, studying the floorboards, scuff marks, a boot heel dragging near the door, a smear of dried mud that hadn't been there when he'd locked the man away. The outlaw had vanished like smoke from a fire. Kane's silver badge spun slowly in his fingers as he stood in the silence, thinking. He'd brought that outlaw in himself, a wiry man with a scarred lip and eyes too quick to trust. The charges were clear: horse theft, attempted murder, and whispers of worse deeds along the border. Kane had taken him at gunpoint just 2 nights ago, after a gunfight in a canyon that left one ranch hand dead. The outlaw had laughed when Kane shoved him into the cell, spitting blood and telling the sheriff he'd never see him hang. Now it looked like the bastard had been right. Bootsteps echoed outside. Kane turned as townsfolk began to gather, drawn by the open door and the sheriff's stillness. Old Mrs. Caro from the boarding house, her apron dusted with flour. Young Eli, wide-eyed and clutching a broom handle like it might ward off evil. Even the blacksmith, Halford, his arms folded like iron rods across his chest. "What's it mean, Sheriff?" someone asked. "Where's the prisoner?" another voice piped. Kane's gaze swept over them, cold and cutting. "Gone." The word hung in the air like a death bell. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Suspicion rose quicker than the sun. Kane saw it in their eyes. Fear, doubt, and something darker, blame. He'd been the one to swear the outlaw was secure. He'd been the one who turned the key, placed the law's weight upon his own shoulders. Now that weight pressed heavier than ever. "Gone." Mrs. Caro's voice trembled. "But you locked him. I seen you." "Then he let him out hisself," spat Halford, his voice rough with accusation. "Or maybe took silver under the table." The crowd's eyes shifted back to Kane, testing him, weighing his silence against the rumors already growing like weeds. His steel-gray eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed level. "Law ain't for sale," he said. "Not while I wear this badge." The townsfolk shuffled their boots in the dirt, but suspicion still lingered. In the Old West, A vanished outlaw was as dangerous as a wolf among cattle, and if the sheriff couldn't keep him caged, maybe the law itself was broken. Kane turned back into the jail, shutting out their whispers. He needed clarity, not noise. Inside, he checked every inch. The bars held firm, no saw marks. The lock showed no tampering. The window in the back wall still nailed shut from the outside. The floor held faint impressions, but nothing that made sense. It was as if the outlaw had walked straight through iron and wood. Kane's jaw clenched tighter. He'd known escapes before. Some men picked locks, some bribed guards, some crawled through tunnels dug spoonful by spoonful. But this was different. This stank of betrayal. He pulled the lantern down from the wall and studied the lock again. Scratches glistened under the light. Fresh, deliberate. Not the work of a drunken outlaw fumbling with picks, but of steady hands. Skilled hands. Hands that had worked keys before. The deputy's keys. Kane's mind flashed to Deputy Cole, young and eager, a boy not yet weathered by the years of dust and blood that turned men into iron. Kane had trusted him to watch the jail while he patrolled the outskirts. But last night, Cole had been gone when Kane returned, claiming a sick horse had kept him at the stable. Too neat. Too convenient. The scar on Kane's jaw burned hot, the way it always did when betrayal was near. He straightened, his coat shifting like the weight of a storm gathering. From outside came the faint clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the cry of a hawk overhead. The town was awake now, but the sheriff's world had just tilted into shadows. He stepped out onto the porch, his boots striking wood like gunshots. The townsfolk still lingered, eyes following his every move. He met their stares one by one until they looked away. Then his voice carried, flat and cold as desert stone. Whoever helped that outlaw walk free is still in this town, and when I find him, law won't be the only thing riding with me. The wind shifted, carrying dust down Main Street. Somewhere, a door creaked shut. The people scattered, murmuring in low tones, leaving the sheriff alone in the rising light of dawn. Kane stood there, silver badge gleaming faintly against the gray morning, Colty 45 resting easy at his hip. The outlaw was gone. The deputy's story didn't hold water, and the law itself was on trial. The scar on his face pulsed, whispering of old betrayals, old failures. Kane spun his badge between his fingers, feeling the cold metal bite against his skin. Law ain't always justice, he muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing toward the horizon where the outlaw's trail would begin. But justice rides with me. His boots stepped off the porch into the dust, leaving behind the silent jailhouse with its empty cells and rattling locks. The sun finally broke through the clouds, washing the town in hard gold light, but it brought no warmth. Sheriff Kane's hunt had begun, and somewhere in that town, a man who called himself his deputy was already watching from the shadows. By mid-morning, the sun had burned the frost to steam, then baked the street into a hardpan glare that made eyes water and tempers short. Sheriff Kane walked the center of Maine, dust cupping his boot heels, hat brim low, badge catching shards of light. Doors half-closed as he passed. Curtains twitched. The wind carried voices just loud enough to be heard and just low enough to be denied. Locked him in himself, he says, or sold the key. Whiskey on his breath last night, I heard. He kept his face made of stone. The law wore a face. If it cracked, the town would crack with it. Outside the Mercantile, Banker Fitch stood in a clean suit, that belonged in a bigger city, not this weathered strip of boards and hope. He placed a neat leather purse on the plank rail with 2 fingers, the way a gentleman sets down a dead snake. "That's what a man gets," Fitch said, voice carrying, "for locking his reputation to a rusty door." Several coins had spilled, bright as fish scales in river light. Kane didn't glance down. He could feel the crowd collecting more boldly now. Halford, the blacksmith, apron powdered with ash. Preacher Ames with his Bible, tucked like a pistol under his arm. Schoolmarm Tess Caldwell, sun in her hair and anger in her stance. Even old Milt Dwyer, pickled since the flood of '69, lurched at the edges like a vulture waiting for a collapse. Kane let silence stretch until it thinned to wire. "You're saying I took that?" he asked Fitch, steel-gray eyes cutting to the man's pale face. "I'm saying it's yours to explain," Fitch replied. "Men who keep us safe do not lose killers in the night. Men who count money don't always count the cost," Kane said. "Pick up your purse." Halford spat. "Ain't about money. It's about fear. My boy sleeps by the stove with a shotgun now. If that outlaw puts so much as a shadow past my door, I'll say the sheriff did it." "Say what you need to say," Kane answered. "I'll do what needs doing." He walked on. Behind him, metal clinked as Fitch scooped his accusation back into soft leather. The sound lasted too long. The Golden Ace Saloon breathed stale beer and old cigar smoke, even with both doors flung wide. Glass chimed. Cards slapped felt. A fly crawled the lip of a bottle and flew off, drunk. Daisy behind the bar. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue, wiped a glass that was already clean, studying him. "Morning, Sheriff," she said. "Town's already drunk on talk. What'll you take?" "Water," he replied. "Amen," said Preacher Ames from a nearby table, surprised into humor. "It died quickly. There's word you drank yourself deaf to a jailbreak." Kane swallowed the water. Warm, metallic. "There's word a lot of things," he said. He set the cup down with care. Words won't hang a man. Evidence might. At the corner table, Deputy Cole rose too quickly, chair legs shrieking the floor. Young face, clean shave, the kind of earnest that had not yet learned what bullets do to belief. He wore his star too bright and his belt too new. "Sheriff," Cole said, every syllable careful. "I checked the cell myself before you took night watch. Lock was sound. I reckon he found a way." "How's your horse?" Kane asked. "Sir? You said last night you left early for a sick horse." Cole's eyes flickered. "Yes, sir. She colicked some. Doc Ellery mixed her laudanum, settled her fine." "Doc don't stock laudanum since the shortages," Daisy said without looking up. "Sends folks to the pharmacist now. Ask any mother with a teething babe." Cole's hand strayed to his belt, as if there might be a truth tucked there. "Guess I went by the druggist, then. I was tired. Might be got turned around." "Might be," Kane said. His jaw worked once, then was still. He could taste the lie like iron on the tongue, but part 4 of his own life would come later. Today was part 2. Suspicion thick as dust, nothing to prove and everything to lose. A church bell tolled noon, 1, 2, 3, then kept going. The sound dragged people like a tide toward the abandoned courthouse at the square's end, a weather-gray box with windows like empty sockets. Outside it, men were raising timbers into a gallows, hammer blows ringing hot and bright. The symbol of law, built by hands that no longer trusted the man who wore its badge. Mayor Lyman Pike, hair parted like pages in a ledger, smile pasted on with flour paste. lifted his arms. "Citizens," he called, "we will not be ruled by fear. We will be ruled by order. In such light, I propose that Sheriff Kane be relieved of duty temporarily, while a committee of reputable businessmen, myself, Mr. Fitch, Mr. Halford, appoints a posse to recover the prisoner." Wind pushed grit across the plank steps. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. All eyes swung to Kane. He took the courthouse steps slowly, boots hitting wood that had heard too many verdicts spoken too quick. He stood above them, where judges used to sit, and let the sight paint itself into his memory. Raw boards of the gallows, rope coiled like a pale snake, faces turned up with the need to believe in something, anything, even a mistake. "You want order?" he said. "Order is a man doing the job he swore, even when it costs him. Order is not three merchants playing sheriff because it feels tidy." Pike's pasted smile thinned. "Then tell us, Sheriff, how a man locked behind iron walks out without breaking so much as a splinter." "He didn't walk out alone," Kane answered. A ripple went through the crowd, the way wind goes through winter grass. "Name the accomplice," Fitch pressed, "or accept suspension until sundown." Preacher Ames half raised a hand. "Brother Kane, grace is plentiful, but nights are long when wolves run free." "By sundown," Pike repeated, enjoying the sound of it. "Either the outlaw swings, or the sheriff does." The line snapped the square in two. You could see who stood with it and who stood against. Halford, grim and sure, moved to the width. Tess Caldwell's jaw tightened. She stepped toward against and dragged two parents along by the roots of their shame. Daisy muttered a prayer that sounded like a curse. Cole looked everywhere but at Kane. Then a laugh reeked of whiskey on the breeze. "I seen it," old Milt Dwyer croaked, climbing onto a trough, arms windmilling for balance. "Seen who come and go last night, I did. Like a fox to the henhouse and back again." Heads turned as one. Milt squinted into the sun, savoring his theater. His skin looked like old parchment, his beard like mold on bread, but his eyes had that sly brightness men get when they know the room has no other truth to feed on. "Speak plain, Milt," Kane said. Milt licked cracked lips. "I was rolling dice with myself in the alley by the jail. Don't judge. Dice is truth when cards lie. Anyhow, I seen a boy slip in the back, easy as sin, keys hanging like church bells on his belt. Came out with a shadow tied to his shoulder. Shadow weren't there a minute before." He grinned, gummy and triumphant. "Ain't no outlaw walks through iron alone." Cole went very still. "Name?" Fitch demanded. Milt tapped his nose. "Name's got weight. My back's weak. Maybe a little easing of the burden?" He made coins dropped into palm with his fingers. The gallows rope gave a slow, lazy swing in the wind, as if time itself were bored of patience. Kane nodded once to Daisy. She brought Milt a tin cup she hadn't filled. He sniffed it, annoyed, but the gesture made him feel seen, and that was coin enough for some men. He puffed up like a frog on a rock. "On a name," Kane repeated. Milt lifted a shaking arm and pointed, but not at Cole, not at Fitch, not at the mayor, but beyond them, to the second-story window of the livery where sun glanced off a pane like a signal mirror. The gunshot cracked the noon like a dry stick. Milt's tin cup leapt and spun, water flashed into diamonds, a red coin bloomed on his shirt. He tipped backward into the trough, splashed doubling the crowd's scream. Women flung hands to mouths. Halford grabbed his son. The preacher grabbed his Bible harder. For one breath, the world forgot to move. Kane was already moving. He'd heard more gunfire than sermons in his life. He knew angles, echoes, and the grammar of powder. That shot had come sharp from the livery loft, high, close, and the shooter had counted on panic to make it seem distant, a smarter man than his bullet. "Down," Kane barked, flinging himself off the courthouse steps. The second shot tore a splinter off the porch post, where his chest had been a blink before. His badge rang as the sliver pinged it, and for an instant the silver star was a bell on his heart. Cole had his pistol out but pointed nowhere, eyes wide, knuckles white. I don't see." "Then learn to," Kane snapped, already sprinting. He cut across the square low, using barrels and a water cart for cover, boots thudding, dust slapping his coat tails. He felt the town waking, the way a body wakes to pain and then chooses to fight. Screams dropped to shouts, shouts sharpened to orders, boards rattled as men dragged wives and children inside. Somewhere behind him, Mayor Pike bleated for calm and thought of committees. The gallows rope swung and kept its own counsel. Kane hit the livery doors and shouldered through the smell of hay-sour, horse-warm air. Up the ladder, 3 rungs at a time, his scar burning, lungs sawing. He cleared the loft with his Colt already finding corners, breathing through his teeth to steady the sights. Hay lay raked into neat rows. A single bale had been dragged to the west window, perfect rest for a rifle. On the floor, a fresh brass casing winked in the gloom, hot enough to sting his fingertips when he scooped it. Outside, through the window's jagged glare, townsfolk were specks scattered by a thrown stone. Milty didn't move. Kane turned. A footprint cut clean in spill grain near the ladder. Narrow boot, Cuban heel, city-made. Beside it, a wet half-moon where a man had set a canteen and left it sweating. He touched the condensation, then his tongue. Tannic, bitter, laudanum, or the ghost of it. Behind him, the ladder creaked. Kane swung his Colt toward the sound. Deputy Cole's head rose into view, slow as sunrise. His eyes flicked to the casing in Kane's hand, the rifle rest at the window, the print in the grain. When he looked back, his expression had the brittle shine of glass underfoot. "Sheriff," he said, voice thin. "You all right?" Kane did not move the gun. The courthouse bell, forgotten in panic, tolled once, just once, and fell silent. "Someone just killed our witness," Kane said, "and he wants me blind." Cole swallowed. Who would do that?" Kane's eyes went to the narrow boot print, then to Cole's square-toed townies. He holstered the Colt, without looking away, and opened his palm. The hot brass glinted against his scarred knuckles. "A man who knows how to make a town doubt the law," he said softly, "and how to make a sheriff miss." Below, the crowd found its voice again. Pike's shout rose over it. "Sundown, Sheriff!" The brass cooled in Kane's hand. Outside, dust lifted in a sudden gust and boiled down Maine like a dirty river, swallowing tracks, swallowing scents. Kane closed his fist around the casing until its rim bit deep. He had until sundown, a dead witness in a trough, a shooter who vanished into grain and glare, and a town hammering a gallows for whoever failed them first. The sun leaned west, hot enough to bleach the sky, pale, and drive the last dew from the grass. Sheriff Kane crouched at the edge of the livery loft, eyes fixed on the grain spill where the boot print pressed clear in the husks. Cuban heel, narrow cut, the kind a man bought from a city cobbler, not the frontier. The brass casing still bit his palm, a reminder of how quickly truth could be silenced. Milt's blood was already drying in the trough outside, turning the water the color of rust. He rose slow, dust ghosting off his coat, and swept the loft again. The dragged bale, the window rest, the damp ring where a canteen had sat. Each piece a whisper pointing to betrayal. Cole shifted below, boots squeaking on ladder rungs, face tight as a noose knot. Kane studied him without blinking. "You see anything?" the deputy asked. Kane closed his fist around the casing. "Enough to know a man don't shoot blind." Cole swallowed, the sound too loud in the hush. "You think it was?" "I think a killer knew right where to sit and right when to fire." Kane cut in. His voice carried iron. "That don't come from luck." Down in the street the crowd was breaking apart, still buzzing like hornets after the nest is struck. Some swore Milt had been a liar, some called him the only honest drunk in town. Pike fanned his silk cravat with self-importance, already telling Fitch and Halford that the sheriff's time was done. The gallows beam went up another foot, hammer ringing like judgment. Kane stepped into the square, dust spiraling off his boots. Cole trailed, hat low. The townsfolk fell quiet as he passed, their eyes measuring. He could feel their verdicts before any court had spoken. "Sheriff," Mayor Pike called, all smile and venom. "Find anything in that loft?" Kane stopped on the boardwalk. The badge at his chest caught sunlight like fire. "I found a shooter who don't want the town hearing truth," he said. His voice carried, sharp as a whip crack, "and I'll find his name before sundown." Fitch sneered. "Fine words, but talk don't keep us safe." Kane's eyes cut to him, gray and cold. "Safe ain't built on gossip and gallows half done. Safe is finding who betrayed the law inside these streets." The silence was thick enough to chew. By late afternoon, Kane rode out past the edge of town, following the shallow prints of a rider who'd left in haste. The trail cut through sagebrush and creekstone, veering toward the old mining road. He moved steady, scanning every broken twig, every overturned pebble. The outlaw might have vanished, but someone had led him out. Kane was sure as his scar. The track spoke of two horses, one heavy-shod, one light. The lighter prints matched the Cuban heel boots he'd seen in the loft. The law was a language, and tracks were its scripture. As he bent to study a print sunk deep in creek mud, a shadow shift-ested on the ridge above. Rifle barrel glinted. Kane dove sideways just as the shot split the air. Bark burst from a mesquite trunk where his head had been. He rolled, Colt drawn, heart hammering but mind cold. "You'll need better aim than that," he shouted. A figure broke from the ridgeline, scrambling for his horse. Sun struck a hat brim low, but the coat flared wide enough for Kane to see the telltale glint of a badge, pinned crooked at the chest. Not his badge, another star, worn dirty. Betrayal cut deeper than the bullet could have. Kane fired once, high, the bullet sparking rock by the rider's stirrup. The horse screamed and bolted, hooves tearing down the slope. Dust swallowed the man whole. Kane stood in the settling silence, chest tight. He'd seen enough. The man who'd silenced Milt wore a badge. When he rode back into town, the gallows was finished, rope swaying in the amber light like a promise. Pike stood on the platform, Fitch beside him, speaking to the gathering as if he already held court. "By sundown, justice will be done. Either the outlaw or the sheriff pays. Order demands it." The crowd murmured. Some faces were grim, others eager. Fear had a way of turning neighbors into jurors. Kane dismounted slow, dust rising around him. He placed the hot brass casing on the rail for all to see. This came from the loft that killed Milt. he said, voice carrying like a sermon, and I saw who left the trail. He wore a badge. Gasps rolled through the crowd. Cole stiffened at his shoulder, jaw clenched. Pike laughed thin, waving his hand. Lies. He spins tales to save himself. But the people weren't so quick to dismiss. Daisy from the saloon stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. I saw a man in a deputy's coat walking near the livery before dawn, thought it odd, but didn't speak. Eyes shifted, suspicion darting like snakes. Cole's face drained white. "Sheriff, you can't mean—" Kane cut him off with a stare, sharp enough to pierce armor. "I mean there's rot in the law, and I'll drag it into the light before that rope swings." The wind rose, carrying grit through the square. Children cried, horses stamped. The gallows rope swayed harder, creaking like it was eager. Kane turned slow, letting the people see his scar, his eyes, his badge. "Law ain't always justice," he said, the old words tasting bitter. "But justice rides with me, and whoever betrayed this town wears tin on his chest. By sundown, I'll name him." The crowd sucked in breath. Pike's smile faltered. Fitch glanced at Cole. Halford shifted uneasily, hand at his hammer, as if building gallows weren't protection enough. The sun dipped lower, dragging shadows long across the dirt. Kane knew time was bleeding out. Betrayal had teeth, and it had already drawn blood. The gallows loomed behind him, the rope swinging like a finger pointing at his back. Would the next neck it found be his own? The heat lingered as the sun began its slow descent, casting long fingers of shadow down Main Street. The gallows creaked on the courthouse square, its rope swaying as though it anticipated a throat to tighten around. Sheriff Kane stood beneath it, boots rooted in dust, his badge glinting faintly in the dying light. Every eye in town weighed on him, some searching for answers, others already carving judgment into their hearts. He could feel time thinning. By sundown, the noose would demand a neck. Kane turned his steel-gray eyes toward Deputy Cole, the young man who stood stiff at his side. Cole's star gleamed too clean, his face too earnest. Kane had once thought that honesty. Now he wondered if it was the sheen of deceit. "Cole," Kane said, low but carrying, "you said your horse took sick last night. That right?" The deputy nodded, Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, sir. Sick enough I had to fetch medicine. And you told me Doc Ellery gave you laudanum for it." Cole hesitated only a heartbeat. "That's right." Daisy from the saloon spoke up, her voice sharp. "Doc don't keep laudanum. Sent me to the druggist last month for my boy's tooth." The crowd stirred, suspicion rolling like thunder. Cole's face went pale beneath the brim of his hat. Kane stepped closer, boots crunching gravel. His scar itched along his jawline, the old tell when betrayal drew near. He spun his silver badge slowly between thumb and finger, letting the crowd see the symbol of law flash like a blade in the sun. "You want to fix your story?" Kane asked, voice flat. Cole's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted to Mayor Pike, to Fitch, then back to Kane. The silence said more than any lie could. Kane led Cole away from the square, the crowd following like vultures trailing a wounded beast. They stopped at the jailhouse, its door yawning wide, as though mocking the emptiness inside. The cells still rattled with absence. Inside, Kane shoved Cole against the bars. Iron clanged. Dust shook loose from the rafters. "You had keys, didn't you?" Kane growled. Cole shook his head too quickly. "I never—" "You were seen at the livery before dawn. You lied about the laudanum, and the shooter in that loft wore a badge." Kane's voice dropped low, each word grinding like gravel under wagon wheels. "How deep are you in this, boy?" Cole's chest heaved. Sweat slicked his temple. "Sheriff, I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't let him out." Kane's steel eyes bore down. "Then who did?" Cole looked away, staring at the dirt floor as though answers might be etched there. His hand twitched toward his belt, then stopped. Kane's Colt was already drawn, pearl handle gleaming like a warning. "Think hard," Kane said. "One word wrong, and justice comes faster than sundown." Cole sagged against the bars, shoulders trembling. "It wasn't me," he whispered. "It was Deputy Harlan." The name struck like a hammer blow. Harlan, older, grizzled, a man Kane had ridden with for years. He'd vouched for Harlan when others questioned his temper, trusted him on the trail, even drank whiskey with him after long nights. Cole's voice cracked. He said the outlaw was worth more alive out there than dead in here. Said there was a bounty bigger than the county could pay. I just looked away. I didn't know he'd shoot Milt. Betrayal had teeth, and now Kane felt them sink deep. "You telling me Harlan sold this town for coin?" Kane's voice was a knife. Cole nodded, shame dragging his chin to his chest. Kane stepped back, the weight of the truth pressing like a millstone. He thought of Harlan's gruff laugh, the way he handled his rifle, the times he'd stood shoulder to shoulder in gunfights. If Cole spoke truth, Harlan had traded all that for silver and sin. The badge Kane wore seemed to burn against his chest. Law was supposed to be unbending iron, but now it looked like tarnished tin. From outside came the rumble of voices. The townsfolk were gathering closer, their patience thinning. Pike's voice rang out. "Time's running out, Sheriff. Either bring us the outlaw or pay his price yourself." The gallows groaned in the wind. Kane holstered his Colt and grabbed Cole by the collar, yanking him forward. "You're coming with me," he said. "You'll point where Harlan went, or I'll leave you in that cell till the rope swings." Cole stumbled, nodding fast. "Yes, sir, I'll show you." They rode out of town, dust trailing like a wounded ghost behind them. The prairie stretched wide, brush whispering in the wind, shadows growing long as the sun dipped lower. Cole pointed toward the canyon ridge. "Harlan took him that way," he said. His voice shook with each word. Kane scanned the horizon, every instinct sharp. Ravens circled high above the canyon mouth. Tracks cut into the earth. 2 horses, one dragging something heavy. Shackles, perhaps. The outlaw hadn't walked free. He'd been delivered. As Kane studied the trail, Cole shifted in his saddle. Kane caught the motion in the corner of his eye, the young deputy's hand creeping toward his revolver. Kane's Colt cleared leather in a blur. He cocked the hammer, the sound like a clock striking doom. "Careful," Kane said, voice cold. "You thinking of finishing the lie?" Cole froze, eyes wide. "No, Sheriff, I swear it. I'm with you." Kane held his aim a beat longer, then lowered the gun slow. "One wrong twitch, and you'll meet sundown before the rest of us." They pressed deeper into the canyon. Shadows swallowed them, cliffs looming like silent judges. The tracks led to a narrow cleft, where water trickled down stone, the kind of place men used for hiding or dying. Kane dismounted, boots crunching gravel. He knelt, touching the damp earth. Fresh prints, ash from a fire still warm, and there, marks of shackles dragged across rock. The outlaw had been here, but the fire was too neat, too deliberate, like a stage set waiting for its audience. A rifle cracked from above, stone shattering inches from Kane's head. He dove behind a boulder, Colt ready. Cole screamed and hit the ground, dirt puffing around him. From the ridge came a voice Kane knew too well, deep, rough, tinged with mockery. "Hate to say it, Sheriff," Harlan called, "but justice don't pay near as good as bounty." The canyon echoed with his laughter. Kane's scar burned hot. He gritted his teeth, crouched low, Colt steady in his hand. The law had betrayed itself. And now Kane would have to decide if the badge on his chest meant anything at all. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening, the gallows waiting back in town. The canyon shadows thickened until the cliffs became black walls. Sheriff Kane crouched behind the boulder, Colt raised, listening to the echo of Harlan's laughter fade into stone. The outlaw's shackles lay cold in the dust, fire embers glowing like the last breaths of a dying man. Betrayal stank heavy, but Kane knew the canyon was a trap sprung too late. Harlan had already led the fugitive out. He holstered his weapon slow, steel-gray eyes hard with promise. "He's not here." Kane muttered, voice like gravel. Cole lay prone in the dirt, shaking, hat gone. The boy's mouth opened as if to speak, but Kane cut him off with a glare. "Not one word. Mount up." They rode back toward town, under a sky bruised purple with dusk. Coyotes yipped far off, their cries weaving with the creak of saddle leather. Kane said nothing, scar burning like a coal. By the time lanterns flickered alive on Main Street, he knew. The outlaw wasn't hiding in some canyon gulch. He was already coming home. The first shot rang out as the clock tower tolled 9. Windows shattered in the mercantile, glass raining onto the street. A lantern toppled, flame licking at canvas. Townsfolk screamed and scattered into the alleys. Kane strode into the square, Colt in hand, coat flaring. His badge glimmered with each flare of firelight. From the shadows of the saloon porch stepped the fugitive outlaw, the same wiry frame, scarred lip curling into a grin. But this time, he wasn't shackled. He carried a Winchester, and his eyes burned with venom. "Well now," the outlaw drawled, his voice low and cruel. "I told you, Sheriff, you'd never see me hang." Gasps rippled through the townsfolk hiding behind barrels and shuttered doors. Kane's jaw tightened. He'd hunted this man, dragged him bleeding into a cell, locked him iron tight. And yet here he stood, striding back into town like a ghost with a grudge. "You broke law once," Kane said, voice flat. "You break it again, I'll bury you for good." The outlaw spat into the dirt, the firelight catching the spit like a spark. "Law? You framed me, Kane. Years back, pinned another man's blood on me. You think I forgot?" The words struck the crowd harder than any bullet. Faces turned toward Kane, wide with doubt. Murmurs hissed in the night air. Even Daisy, standing in the saloon doorway, flinched as if the outlaw's claim had weight. Kane's scar burned hot. He steadied his Colt, but inside his chest, the wound of memory ripped open. Had there been a night, long ago, half drunk on whiskey and rage, when justice blurred too close to vengeance? A gunshot cracked. Kane twisted, the bullet grazing the brim of his hat. He fired back, the Colt's thunder rolling across the square. The outlaw ducked behind a trough, laughter riding the smoke. "Truth's comin', Sheriff," he hollered, "and it'll hang you before it hangs me." The fire at the mercantile spread, heat pulsing across the square. Smoke drifted like black veils, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Kane moved low, crossing from barrel to porch, Colt ready. From the corner of his eye, he saw Deputy Cole, crouched behind the water cart, pistol shaking in his hand. The boy's face was pale, fear etched into every line. Kane growled, "Keep it steady or keep it holstered." I can't get a clean shot," Cole stammered. "Then don't waste powder." Kane's tone cut like iron. The outlaw rose from behind the trough, rifle cracking. Bullets tore splinters from the courthouse posts, drove townsfolk deeper into cover. Kane fired once, twice, forcing him down. Sparks lit the sky as the gallows caught a stray flame, rope twisting in the firelight. The symbol of law itself seemed eager to burn. "Look at it, Kane," the outlaw jeered. "Your gallows won't hold me, but it'll sure hold you." The townsfolk whispered louder now, suspicion rooting deep. Some peered at Kane with doubt, others with outright fear. Mayor Pike's voice rose above them, shrill and eager. "Maybe the outlaw speaks truth. Maybe Kane is no better than him." The mayor's words cut through the smoke, a poison spreading quick. Kane's badge felt heavier than iron. Kane moved through the haze, Colt low, eyes hunting. He circled behind the trough, boots silent on scorched dust. The outlaw crouched there, reloading, teeth bared in a grimace. Kane leveled his gun. "It ends now," Kane said. The outlaw's eyes flicked up, catching the silver badge in the firelight. A slow smile spread across his scarred lip. "Law ain't justice, Sheriff. You of all men should know that." The words were his own, thrown back like a dagger. For a heartbeat, Kane froze, scar burning, memory gnawing. Then the outlaw lunged, rifle swinging. The two men crashed into the dirt, firelight painting them in hell's glow. They grappled, fists cracking, dirt grinding into open cuts. The outlaw's hand clawed for Kane's Colt. Kane slammed his fist into the man's jaw, the impact jarring through his arm. The outlaw spat blood, eyes wild. "You hung my brother," he rasped. "He was innocent, and you knew it." The revelation struck like lightning. The memory flashed. The brother years ago caught in a roundup, evidence thin, Kane's judgment swift. He'd told himself it was justice, but was it? The outlaw's hand closed on the Colt's grip. The trigger shifted. Kane fought, muscles straining, rage and guilt twisting inside him. The standoff broke with a scream. A child's cry pierced the smoke. The blacksmith's boy, stumbling too close to the fire. The outlaw jerked his head, momentarily distracted. Kane seized the second, ripping the Colt free. He pressed the barrel against the outlaw's chest. Time seemed to stop. The boy's cries echoed. The gallows burned, ropes snapping like a whip. The crowd watched, frozen between terror and judgment. "Law ain't always justice," Kane muttered, voice rough as stone. "But justice rides with me." The Colt roared. The outlaw convulsed, breath shuddering out, eyes wide with fury and sorrow. He collapsed against the dirt, blood soaking into the dust. The crowd gasped. Some crossed themselves, others turned away. Pike's voice shrilled, "Murder!" He silenced the man who spoke truth. But Daisy stepped forward, eyes hard. "That man would have killed us all," she said. "Sheriff saved this town." The people wavered, torn between fear and gratitude, between law and justice. Smoke curled around them, carrying the scent of judgment not yet settled. Kane stood above the outlaw's body, badge glinting in the firelight, Colt heavy in his hand. The scar on his face throbbed, whispering of old sins, of choices that could never be undone. The gallows collapsed in flame, crashing to the ground in sparks. The symbol of law lay in ruin, and with it, the line between right and wrong blurred even further. Kane holstered his gun, steel-gray eyes scanning the crowd. Some faces held trust, others held hate. All waited for his next move. In the silence, Kane spun his badge once between his fingers. Then he turned, coat trailing embers, and walked into the smoke. The fire had burned low by dawn, leaving the courthouse square a wasteland of ash and smoke. The gallows lay in a charred heap, rope blackened to cinders. Townsfolk drifted among the ruins, whispering of the night's violence, voices hushed like mourners at a grave. Sheriff Kane stood alone in the square, hat brim shadowing his steel-gray eyes, the outlaw's blood still drying in the dust at his boots. The silver badge on his chest gleamed faintly in the gray light, but it felt less like a symbol of order now and more like a shackle. Every eye seemed to weigh it, to question whether it still meant anything. Mayor Pike stood on the courthouse steps, suit smudged with soot, but smile sharp as ever. "You've killed the prisoner, Sheriff," he said, voice pitched to the crowd. "Shot him down without trial, without jury. You've robbed this town of law." Murmurs rippled. Some nodded in agreement. Others glared at Pike with suspicion. Kane's voice cut through the smoke like a blade. "That outlaw came back to kill. He burned our town, fired on our people. I ended him before he ended us." Daisy stepped forward from the saloon doorway, soot on her apron, eyes hard. "He's right. We'd all be dead if Kane hadn't stood between us and that rifle." But the crowd was split, fear gnawing at their faith. Lawmen were meant to cage killers, not execute them in the dust. The outlaw's words still lingered in the night air. "You framed me." By noon, the square was nearly empty. The people returned to their homes, divided and restless. Kane sat on the jailhouse porch, rolling the badge across his knuckles, staring at the empty cells within. The outlaw's laughter still echoed in his ears. Cole approached, hat in hand, face pale with guilt. "Sheriff," he began, voice shaking. "I didn't know Harlan was deep in it. I thought—" Kane's eyes cut up sharp. "You thought wrong." Cole flinched, shifting his weight. "What happens now?" Kane spun the badge once more, caught it, held it in his palm. "Now the town has to choose, and so do I." That night, the townsfolk gathered in the ruined courthouse. Lanterns cast long, trembling shadows across cracked walls. The burned gallows beams lay stacked in the corner like bones. Kane stood before them, badge pinned, Colt at his side. Pike presided at the judge's bench, smug in his authority. "The law is broken," Pike declared. "We must appoint new order. Sheriff Kane has shown he'll trade the rope for the gun, the trial for the bullet. Is that the law you want?" Murmurs rose, some agreeing, others uneasy. Halford the blacksmith folded his arms. "I want a man who'll fight for us, not count silver while the town burns." Pike bristled, but his smile returned quick. "And when that man decides you're guilty, Halford, when he pulls his Colt instead of calling a jury." Kane's boots rang against the wooden floor as he stepped forward. The lantern light cut sharp lines across his scar. "Law is iron, yes," he said, voice low and steady. "But iron rusts. Rust spreads. Harlan sold his badge. A man like Pike here twists the law to his pocket. You want law? Look at what it's become." Gasps. Pike flushed red, but Kane went on. "I've spent years telling myself law was enough, that the badge meant justice. But the truth is, law bends. Men like Pike bend it, and I've bent it myself. His hand lingered near his Colt. So tonight I'll ask you plain, do you want law or do you want justice? The room went silent. Only the hiss of lantern oil filled the space. Pike stood, slamming a hand on the bench. This is madness. He admits it. He's no sheriff. He's an executioner. Take his badge and hang him before he turns the gun on us all. A few men shouted agreement, but Daisy's voice cut across them, sharp as a whip. Kane's kept this town standing when every outlaw tried to burn it. Law didn't stop them. Kane did. The crowd splintered again, voices rising, anger sparking. Some called for Kane's removal, others for his praise. The courthouse shook with division, the smell of ash heavy in the air. Kane stepped closer to Pike, silver badge glinting in his hand. "You want the badge?" he asked. "Take it." He tossed it onto the bench, the metal ringing like a hammer strike. "But know this, justice doesn't rest on tin. It rides with me, badge or no." The crowd gasped. Pike reached for the badge, but Kane's hand was faster, closing over it again. His eyes locked with the mayor's, cold steel meeting polished lies. "Law may bend under men like you," Kane said softly, "but justice don't." The courthouse doors banged open. A boy stumbled in, out of breath, eyes wide with terror. "Sheriff," he cried. "Riders, coming fast, armed." The room froze. Men looked at one another, fear washing away argument. Kane turned, jaw hard. "How many?" "Dozens," the boy panted. "Maybe more." Kane's scar burned hot. He holstered his Colt, spun the badge once more between his fingers. Law or justice. No more time to choose. The choice had already been made. He pinned the star back to his chest and stepped toward the door. "You wanted law," he said, voice carrying, "but tonight you'll get justice. Saddle up." The townsfolk stirred, murmuring, then slowly followed. Halford grabbed his hammer. Daisy picked up a rifle from behind the saloon bar. Even the preacher clutched his Bible like a weapon. Pike paled, his smile cracking at last. Outside, the night was heavy with dust. Lanterns flickered against the wind. On the far ridge, silhouettes of riders appeared, torches bobbing like fireflies of war. The bandits had returned. Maybe Harlan's doing, maybe vengeance for the outlaw Kane had killed. Either way, the storm had arrived. Kane stood at the head of the square, silver badge gleaming once more on his chest. His Colt rested easy at his side, but his eyes carried the weight of every choice he'd ever made. He whispered to himself, the words only the wind could hear. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." The riders crested the ridge, torches blazing. The town braced for war, and Sheriff Kane stood ready, torn between the badge that bound him and the justice that defined him. The ridge burned with firelight as the riders descended, torches flaring, rifles glinting, hooves pounding the earth like war drums. Dust boiled ahead of them, swallowing the stars. The townsfolk of Dry Creek huddled in the square, some clutching rifles with white knuckles, others trembling with empty hands. Sheriff Kane stood at their front, his duster coat whipping in the wind, Colt heavy at his side, silver badge gleaming in the flicker of flame. The moment stretched, a single breath before chaos. Kane's steel-gray eyes narrowed. "Stay behind cover," he ordered, voice steady as stone. "When the first shot cracks, don't freeze. Fire or flee, but don't freeze." Halford, the blacksmith, tightened his grip on his hammer. Daisy loaded a rifle, jaw set. Cole, pale and sweating, shifted from foot to foot, torn between fear and loyalty, and Pike, slick as ever, slithered behind a wagon, already ducking before the first bullet flew. Then the outlaws thundered into range, whooping like devils, rifles spitting fire. The night exploded. Kane's colt barked twice, clean and measured. 2 riders toppled from saddles, torches scattering sparks into the dirt. Townsfolk fired wildly, gun smoke choking the square. Horses screamed, bullets ricocheted, glass shattered. The blacksmith's hammer cracked a skull. Daisy dropped a rider from her saloon porch. The preacher prayed even as he cocked an old shotgun, voice shaking but fierce. Still the outlaws poured in, dozens of them, circling, firing from the saddle. Kane moved through the smoke like a shadow, each shot placed, each step calculated. He heard Cole behind him, firing wild, panicked. "Steady!" Kane barked, but the boy's pistol clicked empty, hands trembling. An outlaw lunged, revolver raised. Kane turned, Colt flashing, dropping the man a breath before Cole's death. The deputy's eyes were wide, pupils blown. "Sheriff, I can't." "Then get behind cover," Kane snapped, but Cole froze, rooted by terror. Kane shoved him hard toward the church steps, scar burning as the boy stumbled to safety. Lightning split the sky without rain, a storm rolling in like judgment itself. Thunder growled low, blending with the roar of gunfire. The silver badge on Kane's chest flashed with every flare, a beacon and a target. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, booming from the ridge. "Kane!" Kane looked up through the smoke. There stood Harlan, his former deputy, rifle raised high, grin crooked in the torchlight. "You still wearing that badge, after all your sins?" The outlaws cheered at his words, firing harder, pressing the town back. Harlan's betrayal was no secret now. The tin star gleamed crooked on his chest. "You sold this town for silver." Kane growled under his breath. Harlan's voice carried across the square. "No, Sheriff. I sold it for truth. You framed his brother, and now you killed him too. Who's the outlaw now?" The townsfolk faltered, their fire stuttering. Pike seized the chance, shrieking, "You hear him? Kane's no sheriff. He's a murderer." The words struck like bullets. Doubt rippled through the defenders. Guns lowered, eyes turned. Kane felt their judgment, heavy as iron chains. But the storm did not wait for verdicts. A rider charged through the haze, torch high, aiming to set the church ablaze. Kane fired once, twice. The outlaw fell, torch rolling harmless into the dirt. He turned to the crowd, scar raw in the lightning flash. "You want law?" he shouted, voice cutting the storm. "Law bends under men like Pike. You want justice? Then stand with me, or watch this town burn." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Daisy raised her rifle and fired into the dark. Halford roared and swung his hammer. Even the preacher pulled the trigger, voice breaking but true. The square lit with defiance. Kane's chest rose, steady. They had chosen. The battle turned brutal. Outlaws fell. Townsfolk bled. Smoke and rain mingled as the storm broke, drops hissing on hot guns, lightning strobes painting the carnage. Kane pushed forward, eyes locked on Harlan at the ridge. He moved through fire and blood, like a man bound for reckoning. Each outlaw that rose before him fell beneath the Colt's roar. His scar burned like fire, his soul heavy with every choice that had brought him here. At last he reached the courthouse steps. the square littered with bodies and broken glass. Harlan rode down, dismounting with a predator's grace, rifle cast aside for a revolver. "Badge or no badge," Harlan called, stepping into the rain. "This ends tonight." Kane faced him, silver star still pinned, Colty in hand. "It ends," he said, "with justice." The duel was silence before thunder. Harlan's gun lifted. Kane's Colt cleared leather. Lightning flared white. 2 shots, cracked as one. Harlan staggered back, blood blooming from his chest. His revolver clattered to the ground. He fell to his knees, rain soaking into his coat, crooked star glinting one last time before he toppled into the mud. Kane stood above him, Colt smoking, badge gleaming faint. The storm swallowed the last of Harlan's laughter. When the gunfire died, the square was ruin. Bodies sprawled in mud, torches drowned in rain. The townsfolk gathered, wet, bloodied, trembling. Pike crawled from behind the wagon, face pale as chalk. "See?" he stammered. "This is what comes of trusting one man." But his words were drowned by Halford's roar. "No, this is what comes of betrayal." The people turned from Pike. Their eyes found Kane, standing in the rain, scar raw, badge gleaming faint. He looked at them, every face, some grateful, some fearful, all changed. He spun the badge slowly in his fingers. The weight of it cut deeper than any wound. "Law ain't always justice," he said, voice low but carrying. "But justice rode tonight, and it cost us all." He pinned the badge back to his chest, though it felt heavier than iron. The storm rolled west, thunder fading into silence. The people bowed their heads, some in mourning, some in prayer, all in judgment. Kane holstered his Colt, turned into the rain, and walked into the night. Dawn returned to Dry Creek like a weary sigh, the smoke of battle still clinging to its bones. Sheriff Kane sat alone on the jailhouse porch, hat low, badge dull beneath the ash-gray sky. He had defended the town, yes, but at what cost? Harlan's betrayal cut deep, not only for the man he had been, but for what it revealed. The law Kane had sworn to uphold was not iron. It was clay, molded and bent by greed, by fear, by men like Pike. The gallows had burned, and with it, the illusion that law and justice were the same thing. He thought of the outlaw's words, of the brother who had swung from a rope years back. Guilt, uncertain. Was Kane enforcing justice that night, or burying his own rage in the name of law? The scar on his jaw throbbed, whispering truths he'd rather forget. The townsfolk looked to him still, but now their eyes carried both gratitude and suspicion. He was sheriff, yes, but he was also executioner, savior and judge, bound into one. Sheriff Kane's legacy rode a knife's edge, and only time would tell whether he was remembered as lawman or sinner.